Hello, welcome to Ljubljana, first of all, and secondly to our panel. So when I was trying to put together a coherent plan of how do we talk to these kids about about artificial intelligence and everything that's been going on for the last 5 years in terms of the development of this field, I realized that we have three panelists that are all coming in to this topic or to this issue from a slightly different perspective, right? So we have Dr. Mlakar, who's coming in from, let's say, the technical, the engineering side. Then we have the Professor Dr. Rettinger, who's coming in from a more, I'm going to say very broadly, humanistic side. And finally, we have Simon Delakorda, who's coming in from the civic society or the civil society side. And I think these three elements represent sort of like the perfect mesh on how to address this issue, right? So it's not just technology, but it's not just politics, and it's not just humanistic science. It's those three things have to work together in order to get the result that is in a way useful or people friendly. So maybe to start with Dr. Mlakar, an opening question. We're not going to go into presentations. We're just going to do questions. So how do you see the issue of trust in AI system translating into broader public trust in democratic institutions that adopt these technologies, right? So on one side, you have an issue of trust in decision-making systems, in automated decision-making system, and in AI that is being propagated basically throughout the field. And at the same time, you have this question of trust moving on to the institutions that are using these AI solutions. So how do we put these two things together?
Yeah, maybe I could apply this a bit to the health domain. I work with AI a lot in the health domain, and trust there to AI, it's very better, right? So we started with convolutional networks, in radiology. That was a perfect tool. It works in principle better than human mind. It can detect subtle elements that show it's cancer. And then we moved on to more complex processes. And there, you have a problem. You do not know if the AI is right or wrong. And then you come, of course, so the doctor's first thing is, it's not to trust the system. It's to be aware it's a system. It's a tool. So you have to be the one that needs to decide whether what the system recommends actually is true or not. Because in the end, you cannot blame the AI. It's the fault of the AI that I did a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first layer of it. And then you come to the layer of the patients. If the patients don't trust the system, they will not use the system. So in health, this means patients will not go to a doctor that uses AI. And in principle, it's becoming like that. So it will become sooner or later like that when we start promoting the use of the AI, when actually doctors say, okay, you see, this is your diagnosis, and the system made my diagnosis. Would I go to such a doctor? No. Would I go to a doctor that used AI? Yes, but the doctor needs to use it in the correct way. So that's the element of trust of it. It's more or less, as we also saw in our project, it's the responsibility element of it that will in the end generate trust, because we will be using AI. We cannot say we can avoid AI. So I mean that's my take on it, because there is no, because trust is very something that is really, really probably biased to the culture, biased to the individual. And the other element is, as long as I have benefits, I will trust it. So if this AI makes access to services better, the waiting lines for a procedure becomes shorter, everybody will say, yes, let's go with the AI. I don't have to wait 6 months, right? When that stops, when the benefits clearly stop, people will also maybe rethink the use of AI. But in general, AI is a good tool. It's just, how you interpret the data, how resilient you are to the confirmation bias, so do not follow blindly, but investigate a bit more, and that can be applied to general public even more than the experts.
Okay. If we move to Dr. Rettinger, with the question of Dr. Mlakar already said or mentioned it a few times, a question of trust, right? So how do we, what role do you see for, let's call it an explainable AI in rebuilding public trust, especially when citizens are confronted with opaque algorithmic decisions in political civic debates, but also when this interpretation of AI is very hard to achieve, right? It's very hard to sort of go to the people and say, okay, we're now going to explain these black boxes to you, and by doing that, you're going to be better equipped to handle everything the black boxes are sort of spewing out.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great question, and I'm coming more from this kind of social network, public debate, and chatbot angle, and there it's very different to healthcare, I would say. So like the bold statement would be, it's from my perspective, it's pretty much impossible to ensure something like explainable AI in those systems, and even to properly communicate that. So that's just not what the systems, at least that I use at the moment, are made to do. That's not in their nature. So I think we have to deal with that in a different way. Right? We shouldn't even try. We can try, there's research on it, but I don't see how this can be useful in this kind of applications, because it gets very complicated and you cannot communicate this to the end users of social networks, and this makes the system so unattractive and unintuitive that it just doesn't work. So that's kind of my opinion, but of course there are other ways of dealing with that. We just have to accept that they're not explainable. And then of course there's AI literacy. People need to know that they are not explainable and they are doing stuff that is maybe not in their best interest and might be wrong, might be manipulated, might be deceptive, and so on. So I see most of the burden on the regulation and on the enterprises that develop and deploy those systems. And at that stage, we can try to make them as robust, as good as possible. I think that's the area where we have to try to monitor, regulate, but I don't think we can make them explainable at all.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't expecting that answer, to be honest, but I mean, in a way, it seems to sort of it sort of confirms what the civic society was saying, not all along, but for a really long time. But at the same time, we were always confronted with this, let's say, scientific wall of industry and lobbying groups and other actors in the regulatory field that were saying, no, you just don't understand it enough, sort of. Okay, and this is a perfect intro to Mr. Delakorda's question on the issue of the role of the civic society, right? So we've already heard that you cannot explain AI. This is really a T-shirt, a T-shirt moment, and at the same time, we're constantly hearing about the role of this educated, informed citizen that is, engaging into decision-making process, that is making statement, that is, proclaiming some policies. That is basically the integral part of decision-making process, right? So how do we put these two things? How do we put these two things together? And what's the role of the civic society in all of this?
First of all, hello everyone. Thank you for providing us with to this panel. and I hope my voice is going to work for me during this discussion. Frankly speaking, my background is in political science, and discussions about AI and democracy are still somehow uncharted territory. Because if you look at this classical understanding of the decision-making processes and involving the digital tools, the different technologies in these processes, participation is actually about involving citizens in decision-making, using tools to make these processes more involving, more transparent, more deliberative, and at the end of the day, bringing better public policies. So how here the AI takes place, or how AI can be, let's say, useful. I will start what Domen already said. First of all, this question is what kind of information and data is being involved in these government processes, whether this information data is reliable, trustworthy, and for what we see, and now we're moving to my second part of my second head from civil society organizations, is that when we usually look at the draft government proposals tackling different areas of digital public policy, we don't see so much disinformation within those drafts, but maybe more wrong information. So we really have to also react on that. Maybe there are also some misinformation, but it's hard to identify because you don't know what kind of data and research is being used by government officials and politicians to draft this kind of proposal. So what I think here is very important, not only for civil society and citizens, but also for other stakeholders when engaging in policy making, is that we adopt this principle of information-based policy making, meaning that we still keep the human agency on the decision-making process, but enabling early involvement and enabling stakeholders to co-create the process with sharing information and data, so that the people are still the creators of the information and data, and we can then use AI to support understanding the big data, complex analysis on costs and benefits of different government policies and so on. So here I see this, I would say, kind of collaboration between the meaningful usage of the AI and still the basic role of the citizens being in the center of decision-making processes. So having this information from Albania, using the AI assistant to monitor the public procurement is of course one idea how the government online services could go. But here is then the second question is whether these services are being open and transparent in terms that citizens understand how do they work and on what basis they bring those decisions. This is also what the Euro was highlighting. So, and to conclude, so keeping the human agency on the decision-making process is still crucial. And another one is also to monitor those processes in terms of the not being also the subject of the process, but also being an object of the process, meaning that civil society should monitor those processes, like creating shadow reports on decision makers, or monitor how the AI is being used. And this is then also related to my second question, how we're talking the open source definition of the AI that should be transparent to understand algorithms behind it. I will keep asking for the next time. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving back to the issue of AI in health, and it's usually, so AI is usually perceived or presented in, let's say, the broad public sphere as this homogeneous thing, basically, right? So it's AI. It's a black box that does everything you tell it to do, right? But then you go into the, let's say, the nitty-gritty, and you realize, especially in terms of AI and health, that is, there are very different approaches and very different results based on the usage of individual AI systems within individual parts of, let's say, healthcare, right? So it's, I'm reminded of this story or this example about treating skin cancer with AI, right? So you had this example of having this great database of different, basically cancerous moles or cancerous growth on somebody's skin, that enabled the researcher or the AI developers to sort of index, I don't know, approximately, or I'm giving this like off the top of my head, like 100 years of data that has been collected in the area of different moles for the cancerous growth, right? And when they indexed this database, they had a really good learning tool for AI to sort of detect cancerous moles, or if a mole is cancerous or not, right? When they started using it, they realized that this is something that only works for, to be very blunt, white people, right? Because you're lacking data for other, let's call them races, but for other groups of people that didn't have access to healthcare, that didn't have access to skin doctors and so forth. Moving forward, right, the question of data collection, or the question of learning blocks for AI, to me, it seems it's becoming more and more, not opaque, but more and more neglected, right? So as we move towards AI development in different sectors, not enough discussion is being focused on the collection of data, on the quality of data that is being used to build these AI tools, right? So do you see that as an issue, or how big is the let's say faulty or lack of data collection in some areas? How big is this issue for the furtherment of let's say artificial intelligence systems?
Yeah, so basically we're talking about bias. Bias is there, okay? So bias is something that is grounded in human decision making. Any decision I make is sort of biased, right? It's biased by my culture, it's biased by my experience. So AI will always be biased. That's a fact. European Commission with the AI Act is trying to decrease this bias, okay? Or, well, some of them, actually, those officers there are very, very well aware that we cannot prevent the bias. So at least if I make a biased decision, I have to be transparent about it, right? So I have to tell, okay, this is biased. It is, I cannot prevent it. The same as was said before, yes, LLMs, explainability of LLMs in a traditional way, it's not possible. We tried, but the system becomes unusable. And you have to limit the capabilities of a system in such a way that it's not only unusable because of resources, but because of functionalities. So what does bias mean in the AI? You said it well. There is no representative sample of certain conditions under which the data was collected, whether it's skin color, whether it's, sometimes in computer vision, also the lighting, how light falls on the images.
Yes. Yeah.
Makes very, very, very important things. So in computer vision, it's a bit easier because it's one box. It's one algorithm. It's probably convolutional network. So it's easier to sort of manage this, make the system robust, make the system aware what are its outliers, and try to handle those conditions that are at the borders in a different way. Maybe not simply by AI, but adding something. With LLMs, this is impossible. So, AI is very good. The smaller the network, the more accurate the network. Usually it's this kind of way of thinking, but we're trying to create big networks like, OpenAI, the GPT model, the Claude model. Those models are big. They have a lot of data in it. We are talking about 80 billion, even more data points that are there. So we are making general models, and the general models, of course, they're making, in parentheses, assumptions that cannot be explained. I mean, you can post query it, you can put something into the prompts to explain why this happened. But again, you need to trust the explanation as well. So data bias is there. It's a problem, of course. It's a problem. It becomes even bigger problem when you are looking at the models outside of Europe, right? And data model in terms of social communication is even worse, because it's not only missing data. I can put in some data which under certain conditions will generate narratives that I want them to be generated, and they might not be good for democracy, they might not represent European values, etc. That's why we're talking so much about bias, just because of the LLMs, and because everybody uses LLMs, and we can, you need to go whenever an LLM generates something, you need to go and verify it somehow. So that's the thing. But in principle, it's the same way when I write a paper, a scientific paper, right? I make assumptions from my experiment, and in a scientific paper, I do have some results, that sort of support this, right? But sometimes I do make claims that might not be really supported by those results, right? And LLM does it the same way. Sometimes it's okay, it has sort of facts in the data, sometimes it doesn't. And that's the problem, as I said, the misuse is the problem. It's not the good use of it, but bias is not only missing data, it's data which has been intentionally put into the model to convey a message, whatever that message is. So that's why we're dealing with it, and actually European Commission is trying to deal a lot with the bias. And it puts it on the side of the developers, obviously. Not because the user, at least transparency is the bare minimum, to show that, okay, this is my data, my decisions that I convey to you are biased. That's it. Why they're biased, if I can explain that, even better.
And taking a cue from Dr. Mlakar, Professor Dr. Rettinger, this is also one of the pertinent questions, right? So how do we explain, or how do we coordinate the role of, let's say, the users of these LLMs and AI systems, and how do we protect, let's say, or not protect, but how do we legitimize, in a way, or normalize the role of AI developers while focusing on, let's say, bias in these systems, right? So is there a way to, from let's say, a policy perspective, is there a way for the usage of, or the development of, let's say, these ethical frameworks that are sort of at the same time protecting the users, are actually enacted in practice, and at the same time, or thirdly, they're not hampering or limiting the development of these systems, right?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions. Yeah, so first of all, let's be clear about what we talk about when we talk about AI here. We always say AI. In most of the cases, I think we talked about large language models and generative AI. So it's a whole different game if we talk about other types of AI, but let's keep to the large language model area. And there, I think, one way to integrate like the users or the civil society actors is that we could do this during the training of those systems already. So if you think about nowadays large language models that are used, like popular ones, they are developed by companies in a way that is totally untransparent, right? There's some differences, some companies are more transparent, others are not, but fully transparent is very rare, at least for the very big models. And a lot of the design decisions that in the end shape the behavior and the biases, and I also totally agree that all of those systems are biased by nature. This may be another t-shirt moment here. There is not an unbiased AI if you talk about this LLM models, right? It's impossible to unbias those models. But we can have something like a desirable bias in it, right? Or we can try to enforce a certain bias that we think is a good bias, whatever that means. And in my opinion, this can only be decided in a democratic process. And there shouldn't be, let's put it in an extreme case, some young tech nerd in Silicon Valley sitting in the basement and deciding what the guidelines for preference optimization of LLMs are. Because he has a very specific worldview. and a certain bias, right? Maybe it's a good bias, maybe it's bad, maybe it's partially good, whatever, right? But in the end, the public and also the target group needs to decide, at least in a democracy, what's the bias of the system. And this is why it's also very difficult, and also our research shows that you cannot just take an off-the-shelf model and apply it in a certain cultural context. Often it doesn't fit in there. So there's a big need for also developing smaller models for certain specific tasks where you know the bias of this model is this and that. That's what it's made for. Please don't use it for something else, right? And we know how the data was collected, how the tuning-driven preference optimization was done, who made the decisions, what is ethical, good or bad. This needs to be done, at least in a democracy, in a transparent way. And we need democratic processes for that.
And again, segueing to Simon, and the question of this inclusion of NGOs and like the broader civic society in these decision-making processes, right? Do you see it comparing to everything that's happened in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years in terms of including a democratic society or a civic society in the decision-making process regarding policies that focused on the information society? Do you see the NGOs or the, again, broad civic society still being, let's say, a relevant actor to this conversation, right? Despite everything or in spite of everything that's happened, you know, with the decreasage of NGO funding, with the disbursement of different NGOs focusing on different areas that might not coexist or mesh with each other and so forth. And just to warn the audience, so let's wrap it up with Simon and then open the floor to some questions from the audience. I have more, but yes, there's obviously energy in the room. Yes, Simon, thank you.
Domen, thank you very much for this question, because it enables me to release a bit of my frustrations also as a coordinator of the national network of NGOs for information society. What I see currently, there is quite a paradox. On one side, we have quite a huge expectations towards the civil society, towards the NGOs, how we are going to safeguard, how we are going to deal with the issues of the AI, tackling these informations and everything. We can also see this as a part of the Digital Service Act, which also recognizes civil society as being one of the stakeholders in safeguarding the issues of disinformation on the internet. But on the other hand, I'm quite frustrated because the NGO, civil society, really don't have much capacities to undertake this role of responsibility within society, nor they are empowered, nor they don't have human and infrastructure capacities. And I think there are only a few NGOs, at least in Slovenia, which are able, besides what Domen is doing, to tackle these things professionally and in trustworthy way. This is one frustration we have as a civil society. We have to take this burden, but we are not really empowered. And that's why I'm quite happy that recently there was a first ever academic article published in Slovenia on the issue of AI usage in NGO sector. And the result is not surprising that there is not much undertaken to the AI within the civil society sector, because you need access to the AI, you need technical skills, you need resources to experiment, to develop those technologies. And that's why it's even more easier to deal with advocacy and education as such, to undertake this as a part of civil society. But however, I see some positive developments. Recently there was an interesting debate within the cybercrime community, which is a part of the Computer History Museum of Slovenia, which discussed, and now I'm coming back to this issue of bias and transparency of the AI. They discussed the open source definition of the AI. The idea of this discussion is whether should we create a standard which enables researchers, developers, and educators to evaluate in what way the AI systems are transparent and open, meaning in what way they gather data, what data is supplied, what is the input, what is the outcome, how this process is doing, which you already said it is impossible to understand. But still, we can have some basic check and balances whether to see if these AI systems are open. And in the manner of the open source principles, they can then also be replicated. So currently, the Slovenian government, the Ministry for Digital Transformation, is updating the national plan for usage and development of AI. And part of our network plan is also to involve the principle of open source AI into this plan, in terms that the open source definition of AI should be, the principle should be applied when talking about using AI in public domain for public services, especially for the government services. Also, all those services that are using AI developed based on the public taxpayer money. This is something that civil society can do, but as I said, do not expect that we are going to save the world. Here we need collaboration with academia, with the technology, and I also see this kind of idea, creating this kind of discussions and roundtables by the organizers as the right approach to combine knowledge, the resources, and also advocacy capacities.
Thank you. Okay, so let's have some questions from the audience.
First of all, thank you for your talk, very interesting debate. I have two questions for all speakers. The first one, what is, according to you, the role of public education in order to improve responsibility, in particular, not only academic research, but public education, schools, universities? What is the role in order to improve responsibility? The second point is the centrality of human-centric perspective, the centrality of human being. We share together that the centrality of humans, but my question is, according to you, what kind of human? What are, according to you, main shared values, such as peace, dignity, in which we agree together in a universal way for create a universal law about interaction between human being and artificial intelligence? Thank you again for your talk.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so about the first question, education, I believe it's very important just because of the fact that it is part of everyday usage of like younger people is already AI, right? They're using chatbots a lot. They are on social media, they use ChatGPT for their homework and so on, and for a lot more. So there is a very big need that this is also covered in education, that they know about what they're doing and how this works. But on the other hand, I have the opinion that we cannot burden the education system and like the kids and students and the end users with all of this burden of dealing with AI, because it's just too powerful and too complex to really understand. It's like very hard to use it responsibly just by learning about it. Right? So we also, on the other hand, have to make sure that we make those systems as useful as possible and as few risks as possible. Right? So, that's my opinion. I don't know about the second.
But it's so simple. It's about the new man, basically.
So I'm not 100% sure I understood the second question. Is it about like a general way of communicating that all humans agree with, or that we would like
It's
to?
about human values.
Yeah.
what kind of human values we have to do.
Yeah, so I would say the same answer that I gave before is it has to be a local democratic decision. I don't think we can say something like all of AI, like there's the 3 rules of whatever, how AI has to behave or something like this. It has to be decided for every society by the society itself in a democratic process what the values are.
Yeah.
Maybe we can combine strengths and knowledge to answer this question, because it's very relevant, but it also has some, I would say, deep consequences on how we understand society. The fact is, at least I think social and human scientists are agreeing that the postmodern societies, at least those in the West, are very complex societies. So it means that within the single society you have different values, norms, sets, which are also fighting for the public policies, for the public measures and for funding. So it's hard to understand society as being a uniform set of values. Even in this space, probably we could identify 3 or 4 sets of values, and then which are also aligned to how to use the AI. And globally, currently we have 3 main policy approaches to the AI. One is the American one, the United States, Silicon Valley, AI in the form of the open market. Then we have China approach, totalitarian state. Then you have this European set of values, human rights, and so on. And now the question is how these value systems are battling. But this is only on the global level. Now, if we go to the meso level on the society, when we have even more disparate issues, and this is also frustration for us, for the NGO sector, how to identify those values. But this is one thing I would say. So, universal law on AI, it's probably a set of different approaches to the AI, which I agree have to collaborate and communicate among each other in a democratic way. So they have to deliberate, meaning that we solve conflicts without fighting and wars. So this is not, but I'm already being too idealistic. And going to the education system, usually there are 2 approaches, informal and informal education approaches. For example, in Slovenia, there was an amendment of the law on primary schools, which is now introducing a new course on digital technologies and computers science. And as far as I know, how this government, as an NGO, how government is then implementing these measures, probably they are going to use the digital framework for digital skills for citizens, which is a kind of agreeable framework for the digital skills on the EU level. Probably they're going to incorporate it into the curriculum of this subject. And if you're looking at this framework, there is quite a strong section of understanding the AI, what AI does, what doesn't, what don't does, how we use it, and a special section is attitudes towards the AI, which is about learning about deepfakes, disinformation, so on. So this is going to be incorporated into the formal education system. I think this is going to be the right approach. And then is this informal education, which is a bit more flexible. What NGO sector is doing, what Domen is doing, what our members are also doing, trying also to be flexible and try to respond, educate, raise awareness when the issues with the AI arise, and they're not being incorporated into the formal curricula, but still you have to react as a civil society in order to raise this issue, to create awareness. And I think this combination of informal and formal approach to education on the AI is something that could work. But they both have strengths and weaknesses, and informal especially can be problematic in terms of how effective this actually is, because you still learn. Informal is about learning by doing.
Mm.
Yeah, and just a quick comment to make it even more complex. We do a lot of related to the first part of the question. So we do a lot of research on this kind of values in large language models, and you have to consider that also a large language model is more like a representation of a certain population, right? So it's not that this large language model has one set of values and it sticks to it. Right? There's so many different values that it collected from all of the training data, and it's all in there. It typically has a bias, so you can fingerprint it. We also have a paper on this. So if you ask a large language model certain like ethical questions, you can find out what language model it is, right? So every language model has a certain fingerprint of how it reacts to ethical questions, but as soon as you prompt it in a different way, a little bit of fine tuning, or you have some other manipulation techniques, you basically, all of the large language model can represent the most extreme values you can think of, because it's all already in there, right? So technically, it is like a representation of a society, right? So all you can do is kind of try to impose like a dominating, desirable bias into the system, but all of the rest is still there, right? It's just kind of pushed apart a little bit.
Yeah, and from time to time it will come up.
Yes.
And that's
If
the
you
problem.
know how to trigger it, then it's
Yeah, sometimes you can do it by mistake, especially if you're a child playing with ChatGPT or with, Chinese models. So that's why I would argue, yes, it's hard to educate people. We need to do protection of the models, limit as much as we can the risks, but we are not a bubble. AI Act is Europe, and we are living in internet. So, you cannot regulate outside virtually EU, not Europe, but outside EU. In principle, you cannot regulate UK if you want, right? Because they are not part of EU, so they do not necessarily confirm or go with our regulation that we as European citizens or our governments decided it's best for us, right? So, yeah, education needs to be there. And I think the key thing is kids need to be aware that whatever they do may have consequences, right? Bully someone today, it's fairly easy, right? And why they do it? Yeah, because nobody's bullying them. They need to experience maybe, in the education, action by doing and experiencing to see that, maybe, AI should not be used for generating some strange content. We had a couple of these kind of elements of deepfakes, right, where you can completely destroy someone's reputation, in principle. So I think, it has to start with the education, but of course, as much as we can, we need to protect us. But as I said, Europe is not a bubble. While AI Act will work, and it's a good thing, and same as GDPR, it will sooner or later become something that everybody will perceive, even academia, as a valuable tool, right? It will be in Europe. The other models, we cannot do anything about them. Basically, Facebook will pay 500 million euros as a penalty, and that's it. And they will continue living, they will continue doing what they're doing because the market is good enough.
Sorry if I talk too much, but I fully agree. Unfortunately, I think we all agree. It's not like a panel where we start fighting about topics.
Of course.
So I see also some hope, at least in theory, that so now more and more like European models pop up, right? There's the Swiss model, there's German models, there's also what's this called, the Tilde model from Latvia or something like this. So, and they are much more transparent about what training data they used and how they always put like used European values or something like this. What exactly that means, I don't know. But right, so I think this is could be a good step in the right direction. Of course, then the big question is who's using those models, right? As long as ChatGPT is dominating and whatever, all of those models are integrated into some Microsoft Office tools and in WhatsApp and whatever, right? Those are all those large language models that are not the ones that were developed in the EU. some attempts to have some European values. So I think this is it could be an interesting way how to move forward, right? And since those models become more and more available, we also have more and more options in the searches. So,
And I think that the European Union again is going into exactly that direction. You know, there was a funding of 200 million to develop the first really European large language model. I think that's progressing. We're also trying to, you know, move our resources from Hugging Face to sort of European repositories where they're better managed and sort of, you know, again, because they're also managed by European laws and European restrictions, which, yeah, it seems that they're good, right? They're not really market economy, but they're, you know, sort of a balance between market and the society. So yeah, I mean, hopefully sooner or later we move to the point where we'll say, okay, no, I won't use ChatGPT. But now it's simple. You know, you just write OpenAI and you start using it. It's free. You know, free in parentheses. It doesn't cost you anything. You are giving a lot away. It does not cost you anything, right? That's the point. Also Gemini, also all those models, they're there. Very fairly easy to use. European models at the moment, they're not available more or less to the public in a similar way. So I think this is the next step that we need to do. We are building the infrastructure. So then if we have a common European model, let's put it out there for people to use.
Okay. I'm just gonna say I have thoughts at this moment, but let's keep it open to the floor. Yeah,
And I would
just
like
for the camera. Yeah.
As for this last point, from a technical point of view, I'm interested in understanding if it's possible to train a large language model over different languages at once. Or you got to choose a language, for example, English, French, or Slovenian, and you can train it, at least in the first phase, on one language, because that could be a problem for a European model.
No, but all models now virtually support, large language models support all languages in principle. So whatever data is there, yeah, the models work, so it's fairly simple. But of course, as I said before, ideally, you know, each language would have its own model so that it can be trained precisely, it can be fine-tuned to the nature of the language, because English, Slovenian, you know, Italian, they're completely different languages.
yeah, so I agree, and that the European languages, they try to balance the different languages better. So in the commercial models, English is, I don't know, 70-80% of the data that is used. And of course, it's the more data, the better those models are. And we are also doing a lot of research on kind of lower resource languages, like the Luxembourgish and this kind of language models that just have a difficulty to obtain the training data in a sort of way that they are comparable to the dominating ones. But all of the large language models are nowadays trained at the same time on different languages. That's why they also work that well on translation. And for us, it's kind of the next step is also very important. You start from a multilingual model that is as unbiased on the different languages as possible, but then you go into a certain group of people, right? And you try to fine-tune that for their purposes. So we are about to start to do this for like the Turkish diaspora in Germany, which is kind of, they have a different language than Turkish people, but they also have a different language than Germans, of course, right? Or we do this for Chinese in German, and this kind of stuff, right? So I'm not sure if there's like this one size fits all
No.
type of language model at the end.
Shouldn't be as simple.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Just a thought, so you were just saying that it's not possible to have like one size fits it all. Could we then have like in Utopia, to have then like this really small different large language models that you could choose that you would, okay, so I want this large language models to be modeling my social media or like or for whatever use as we have also for rankings.
Yes, I think we already are a good step that way. So every time we start our experiments, we decide, do we take a Chinese language model, American one, a European one? From the Middle East, there are some, right? Saudi Arabia, they have good language models and stuff. So we decide that for me the question is, and I don't know how it will go in the end. Do we have a lot of small models in the end, or do we have a large language model? But then we can kind of contextualize. We can tell we are in this context, and then they really take over this context, and they act like they are in Luxembourg and they talk whatever French in a Luxembourg trait, which is different to French in a different part, or any European knows. If you move from one village to the next village, could be that people use different words, right? They do different ways of talking to each other, and this kind of, maybe this can also be captured in one model. Don't know. Let's see.
Yeah, just to add, but general purpose models are a no-no under European Act and under legislation. So as soon as you come to a general purpose model, at least in health, you're high risk. You're red flag. So in health, you should fine-tune the model for a specific task. Why? So that you can also, you understand what the issues are, because the wider you go, the more unknowns are, and the greater the chance that something comes out which should not come out of the model. Because, the model is not human, so it doesn't have values in the sense that, it's aware of what the model is doing. It's combining words in principle, gluing them together, and pushing them out under certain context. The model does not evaluate whether it is offensive or not. You need another model to do that. So that's how we do it, yeah? You basically monitor a model with a model, so that you have this guardrailing, things like that in place. So I would still go for smaller models that you can really optimize well, and you know what to expect.
Maybe a follow-up question, but is this what you've just proposed? Is this sustainable, or is this something that in practice actually works on a, let's say, an extended period of time? Because it seems to me that I love how we started talking about, will AI save the world instantly, despite the fact that this whole, let's say, bubble started inflating like 4 or 5 years ago in a way. But on the same side, or on the other side, we keep forgetting, or we keep neglecting the issue of, let's say, a question of these solutions that are then applied to a really tiny percentage of, or a tiny sliver of let's say, market or an industry, right? So could we end up, let's say, further down the road with not so large language models, I'm patenting this, that are working really good in a really, as I said, tiny portion of the market that they now, let's say, hold in their grasp.
So so as I said, I don't know. This is to me, technically, this is an undecided thing, because you could make the argument that transfer learning is a very important part of the success of those language models. So they benefit a lot from that you feed them with information from different languages. Right? They can transfer this knowledge in kind of a non-language specific manner, so that even if you have like a not so resourced language, you have a useful language model that you can use in this language because it was trained on a larger language. Right? So in this sense, I'm not sure if we can have, so how the process will look like. Maybe just those huge models that you then contextualize, customize on one specific context are just better, right? They just can do more than the ones that are
dedicated to one task only. We have seen this a lot of times in machine learning development and research that these kind of dedicated models are just inferior to the large ones. I don't know.
Mm.
I also don't know what's this argument.
I think, one more. Okay, let's wrap it up with this one. And then we can continue.
Thank you so much for a very interesting discussion. I'm Yasama Giuseppe, I'm from Lexi, and I've actually written a thesis for my PhD on discrimination in algorithm decisions. And I just wanted to make a comment. It's not really a question, but something to also maybe talk about in the break afterwards. There is this lack of conversation, maybe between legal and technical people. We are all aware of that. But the fact that we always generalize and we say bias, I cannot accept it, because I would differentiate between bias and discrimination as a person that works in the field of law and that has studied law, because we look at the outcome of a decision. And if the outcome has a problem, then it's called discrimination. So it's not fair that you get a certain outcome. So I wouldn't look necessarily only at the initial data set for training, or necessarily just the process of development, or the design behind it. I would look at the outcome more importantly than everything else. And this is, I think, a problem that we have with, for example, existing bias metrics. They usually look at the data set or the model development. And the ones that look at the outcome together with those things, they're not developed very well, because simply, I think technical people don't have enough conversations with legal people about that. So this was just, within parentheses, a comment. I have a lot of other questions and comments, but I thought this would be the most interesting one maybe to talk about, because we also heard a very interesting presentation from Tanya about this, and I think it deserves attention that it can be discrimination-free. Maybe it cannot be statistically bias-free, but a system can actually technically be discrimination-free if we look at the output. And then another question would be whether or not the system in question is even necessary. Because I think we're at a point where there's this hype, this bubble of AI where everyone is investing, throwing billions of dollars in development of such systems in fields that maybe aren't necessary. So this is one side, and then the other side would be the human in the loop. So for example, the example of the cancer diagnosis system. You need a human expert there. There is no way you can rely for such an important decision only on an AI decision. And then when you put the human in the loop, unfortunately, as we see even with our daily life, we have this automation bias of trusting immediately the results of the AI. So even as a medical doctor trained to diagnose this yourself, you probably go towards the direction that the AI tells you. So we need AI literacy, but maybe more for the people, experts that are using AI systems to come to certain decisions together with AI. So for the human in the loop, that's...
Sorry, can I have just one counter question? So why do you think, or why in your opinion, are people more focusing on whatever comes before the consequence of the decision? So you said that nobody's paying attention to the consequences, right? So why do you think that is?
I think because we simply focus on the statistical aspects of it. Because I think the brain of someone who develops a system functions differently than who sees the outcome of that system. And I think this is a problem of also European regulation of the AI Act, because it says technically bias-free, and that's impossible for me. I think it should have said fair. And actually in the first draft, there was no mention of fairness. And if we say even fair, let's say, it's very difficult to define fair.
Yes. What is fair?
And exactly, and then we have to go to all of these. It is something that is considered fair in Europe, considered fair also, I don't know, in the US?
Yes.
Or not. Of course, it should be ideally like that, but it's not. Cultures are different, contexts are different. So I think the problem is that since it's too difficult to tackle the outcome, then we just go and tackle the input.
That's the point. So maybe some context from the TWAN project, where we do the social simulation. Measuring the impact is extremely hard. So we can simulate discussions on social networks in some kind of authentic way, right? But then the question is this now a good or a bad outcome? So what's the metric, right? And then you somehow move, if you want to move from, let's say, bias to something like discrimination or real outcome, measures of outcome, it gets harder and harder, and you need to look at different types of research methods and disciplines to even capture that. So something like, is now a discussion on social media, okay, what we can measure is it polarized or not, right? Or the amount of hate speech or this kind of metrics, we can measure that. But is this already a negative or unfair or whatever outcome of all of this, right? Does this lead to riots, to political violence, to whatever in reality, like physical violence? And kind of connecting this in a measurable way is, I mean, we haven't figured it out right yet. It's also not part of the one project in the end, but it's kind of also more like from communication science and political science point of view, how to measure the impact of media on society and this kind of super hard questions. How to, as a researcher, as an academic, capture that. So that's where we need to get to, I guess.
Maybe there's also one important aspect relating to your research is that the dilemma for decision makers. We have this outcome, and now how we interpret it. And because usually what we see in the NGO sector, relationship between the non-governmental organizations and the government is usually that one. The glass is half empty or the glass is half full. So usually NGO say it's half empty and the government says no, it's half full, it's okay. So, and then is this dimension which is arising between the relationship of the power. Who has the power to decide what kind of interpretation is going to be valid and legitimate and how the society or the policy measure is going to follow it. And then you have this politics going on, and at the end of the day, maybe even we forget about the data that was actually used for decision making, and then is something coming out totally different, and that's why we said that politics is somehow irrational, because also have some other aspects that we cannot cover with the AI, so it's always this dynamic, whether to come out with the best possible decisions in terms of the public interest. Then is another question, what is public interest? Here I'm going to conclude my thoughts.
Yeah, and just from the technical point of view, it's grounded in the logic of how AI works. So, data bias creates biased decisions, it creates unfairness, it creates discriminatory recommendations, right? So you can trace data bias. You cannot trace what is happening within the model because it's a black box model. And for instance, in healthcare, it's very hard to measure the outcome until the outcome actually happens. So I need to make a decision of treatment, and then I need to wait to see what the outcome of the treatment is. So that's not acceptable either, right? So it's the most safe way is to first go with preventing the bias in the data, or minimizing the bias of the data, or contextualizing the bias in the data.
It reduces accuracy if you have an unbiased data set, because statistical bias is actually needed in AI to function the way it's supposed to function.
Yeah, but I'm not, you see, the problem is I'm not talking about bias that it's there. It's about you coming to a doctor and the patient, the model, never saw patient like you.
Yeah.
That's
An
the problem
outlier.
with it. Yeah, an outlier. You come as an outlier, so that's what we try to reduce or at least make transparent, because that we can prevent and that we can measure. Inside the model, we cannot do a lot because it's a black box approach. So, in principle, different architectures, different post hoc explanations can be done, etc.
So for me, that would be explainability. If you can at least when it comes to discrimination, that would be explainability, because if you can actually understand that this is an outlier and address that, that's already what you should do to make your system bias-free.
Yeah, that's transparency, basically, what European
Exactly.
Commission wants. Tell me on what data the model was trained, so that when I introduce my feature set, I already know whether, it might be an outlier or not.
Okay, idea.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to the questions from the audience.